Privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm standing in recognition of Black History Month, and I plan to talk about criminal justice. But before I do that, I want to own that this was a really hard speech for me to write. I tend to base my speeches in personal stories. It's hard to write a speech that's not about me. But I'm not personally impacted by the criminal justice system. I, in fact, have never even been pulled over by a police officer, and I'm hoping that once I get my plates, that streak will continue. But as I sat and prepared this speech and thought about why it was important to say what I'm about to say, I thought not about my own stories, but all the people who are affected and who are unable to stand here right now. Many of them, either because they're incarcerated, they're struggling, and they're unable to even vote to change a system that put them there. I think of my brother, who was routinely pulled over, and I think of my dad, who told him, "You need to make sure you do not wear a hoodie when you're driving. Don't look suspicious. Be careful if you see a police officer." So that's why I'm standing. I just want to own that before I start. The definition of justice is what is just, fair, and aligned with truth and fact. Lady Justice wears a blindfold. Why is that? Because for true justice to exist, it cannot have bias. You are supposed to weigh truth and facts. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, too many Black Americans in our country have been denied justice. Almost as soon as Black Americans were freed in the South, they were expressly and explicitly targeted. In fact, by 1870, 95% of those imprisoned in the South were Black Americans. Then came Jim Crow-era laws meant to disenfranchise and tear apart Black communities. Then politically motivated criminal codes that led to mass incarceration. And the facts of a biased system are there, Mr. Speaker. Black Americans are given sentences 20% longer than those given to white males who are convicted of the same crimes. Black Americans suffer a much higher percentage of wrongful convictions. In fact, they're twice as likely to be exonerated through DNA evidence. Black Americans are more likely to be stopped and searched, more likely to receive the death penalty. The list goes on. Study after study shows that race matters at every single level of the criminal justice system. The nature of plea deals offered, bail hearings, sentence lengths, parole and probation decisions, access to a lawyer, which is something that we voted on last week on partisan lines. Political rhetoric steeped in fear and not fact has been used to justify what is by definition an unjust system. And I want to leave us with some words from Kimba Smith-Pradia. She's a Glen Allen native who was pardoned just last month, although I hear they're handing those out to everyone nowadays. Not speaking of you, Mr. Speaker.
I know.
She was sentenced to 24.5 years in prison for a first-time, nonviolent cocaine offense. And I want to remind our body, we've heard testimony on this floor about a similar offense that received a much different sentence, and someone who was given a lot more grace and forgiveness. Kimba said, "Over the past 50 years, America has doubled down on a deeply troubling and counterproductive criminal legal system that perpetuates cycles of crime and inequality. It tears families apart, leaving children without their parents and communities fractured, all while siphoning resources away from education, mental health, and social programs, hindering our nation's progress." Mr. Speaker, my hope with this speech is to remind those in this chamber that the history of our justice system is both Black history and also current events. And any of us, so everyone in this room who's in a seat of power, should be analyzing criminal policies not with a campaign lens, not only with a personal lens, but with a lens of what is just, fair, and aligned with truth and fact. Happy Black History Month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.